So Tom, there was a meta-analysis here addressing this concept of bevacizumab or PARP. I kind of like that. I know you read that, and tell me what that showed.
Yeah, Brad, it was one of the papers that really caught my eye. It's a little clever, and I don't know enough about the statistical means that were used. They used a SUCRA tool, which is to rank effect size with the surface under the cumulative ranking value that was applied, and I don't know what that means exactly, so don't pin me down on that. But the numbers look great.
Sounds good,
because I think the bottom line is, how do we interpret these 5 trials, right? How do we put those into practice, and when do we use a PARP, and when do we use Bev? I think everyone on the panel, if you don't agree, please speak up. But I think we all say that patients that are candidates for maintenance should be offered maintenance.
Yes.
I think everyone agrees on that. But what maintenance, and how do we look at that? And what they tried to do was model from the 8 major trials that are out there, and calculate a hazard ratio. And what they did is they looked at patients that were all comers, and you might imagine you're going to have a mix then of wild type and mutations that are probably 20-some% mutations and 70-some% not. But what's more informative to me was the breakdown of the wild type versus the BRCA mutant. And what they did is they compared PARP versus Bev. They compared PARP versus just chemo alone, or Bev versus chemo alone. And for the mutants, imagine, of course, who was going to win. It was obviously the PARP. So the PARP has 0.46 versus chemo has a ratio of 0.25, which we already know. And Bev also did well with a hazard ratio of 0.55. Those are in the patient, but not as well as the PARP in the BRCA mutated patients. In the wild type, saw a little bit of a diminution favoring the PARP, but it crossed 1. It was 0.87. So that's the area that we don't know, and that's the biggest patient population that we have, and it still doesn't completely decide that. But I was surprised to see it perform as well as it did. The PARP did quite well there, and PARP did much better, as did Bev versus traditional chemo.
But this all fits now. So we said that probably most patients should get Bev frontline. And if you got Bev frontline, when you have a platinum-sensitive relapse, which almost all patients do because you got Bev and it extends the platinum-free interval, then you should get PARP second line. Yeah. So that meta-analysis supports, I think, what we're doing. Bev frontline, PARP second line maintenance, unless you're BRCA mutated, then you get olaparib frontline and Bev second line. And to your point, I think it's our duty to at least consider both agents or classes of agents for every patient so that they can get the benefit.
Absolutely. And Tom and I have talked about this. We just put out a paper in The Oncologist to try to beat the drum. With hazard ratios in Aerial 3, study 19.3,
I know,
how
right?
could you not offer a PARP inhibitor, let alone the Bev data? So this is something that we as the community need to really
So why aren't they
spread the
doing
word.
it?
Well, I think some of it speaks to our need to communicate with our patients up front.
I'm trying.
I know. But even on a clinician-to-patient basis in the office, the first time we see a patient with ovarian cancer, we need to let them know they're likely going to be on therapy, even if they respond, because maintenance or switch maintenance is going to be key to their success.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the title of our paper, and Leslie Randall was the other author, first author on that paper with Michael and I, and the title of it was Practice Changing Data Calls for Changing Practice. And I do think that one of
Not sponsored by any company, very
yeah,
comprehensive in The Oncologist.
But I think what's important to understand is that there's a number of ovarian cancers that are treated by low-volume physicians, and it's hard to keep up with all. Look at all the things we've said. We do this every day, and it's difficult. And I think dissemination of this knowledge is going to take some time, and the emphasis. When there's this much knowledge, how do you prioritize it? And this is one of the things I think we should be prioritizing in terms of messaging, and I think we've done that now.
Well, I think that paper, I just want to mention, I can feel the passion reading the paper because you even used exclamation points to drive the point home.
But we all read it, right?
Yeah.
I love it. And we never read what you write, don't I?
I know. I know, even my emails and my texts. And I do use a lot of exclamation points just to get you to read it.
The title, to be full disclosure, the title was Tom's idea. But I do think we're to the point, perhaps, where we were with genetic testing about 5 years ago, where we demand ASCO, SGO, IGCS to make a statement about maintenance.
So we got two challenges, and you made the comment about low volume treaters. You know, it's become evident that about half of gynecologic oncologists don't give chemotherapy, which is fine. They're more surgically oriented. But surgery is being deprioritized in our specialty with all of these targeted therapies. Okay, and those, generally, those patients that are operated on by a gynecologic oncologist that don't give chemotherapy are referred to a medical oncologist. So I want the medical oncologist to continue to do the wonderful job that they're doing, and hopefully to participate in these sort of scientific exchanges to stay up to date.